Oh.
Hello. I'm just waiting to admit all, just trying to admit all our speakers first.
You look very porcelain. You look beautiful.
Yeah.
Aye.
It's the lighting.
Ah.
I'm in my bedroom. It's my rosary beads.
Gorgeous. Look gorgeous.
Sorry, guys, 1 sec. My camera's not working. Oh, God.
Hi, Karen. Welcome, darling.
Hi, Karen.
I'm just going to make a few people, including yourself, co-hosts. Anne-Marie's also going to co-host for us when she gets here. Made Sam a co-host. So there's quite a few people waiting to get in.
Mm-hmm.
So we shall just wait and see. How you feeling, Karen? You doing all right?
A bit nervous.
You'll be great. So you will. Can't help but tell the truth, eh?
I know, that's that.
Our stories have power, darling.
Hopefully it makes a difference. Chunk changes.
Well, we've got a bit of a good track record now for making a difference, so
Fingers crossed.
Long may it continue. Maybe we'll even get a wee bit of credit for it.
Well, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? But aye.
How you getting on, Sam? Darren McGarvey's in the waiting room.
Is it?
I'll let him in.
Aye. Yeah, I think I'll let Leah in as well. I'm just looking for the speakers, so if you spot any of the speakers, let them in.
Good.
Hi, Lee.
Good evening.
Hi, Darren.
How's it going?
Raz.
Hello.
How are you?
Not bad. How are you?
Surviving.
Are you on holiday now?
Yes, well, tomorrow.
Tomorrow. I was
I'm not even
working already.
Loki, I'm not even, because the reality is the Cora funding just came out, so I'm going to be spending my week annual leave applying for Cora funding.
Oh, right, okay. The joy.
I can't see the criteria yet, Natalie, for it.
No, I haven't seen anything yet. I just know that it'll be the Cora, so...
It should just say, you can't be a quango. Just be the top line. Proof that you're not a quango.
Welcome, Ian. Welcome, Monica. Just waiting a couple more of our
Hi, everyone.
Hiya.
How are you, Monica?
I'm good. How are you, Natalie?
I'm good. Are you busy?
Just a wee bit.
Oh my gosh. So much, eh?
This lockdown's making me do some crazy stuff, but...
You go, girl. You love a bit of crazy.
You're doing awful well in the leadership contest, Monica, eh?
Oh, thank you. That's nice to hear. We'll see what happens. The voting's still underway, Anne-Marie.
It certainly looks that way. Anyway, I didn't think you'd have hope in hell, but I wouldn't have put any money on you, but I would now.
I'm starting to worry.
No, you'll be amazing, Monica. You've already got so much respect because of your standing up for women's rights as well. That's massive for Scottish Government to say, okay, we need to validate women, let's look at their rights and let's actually give them a right, like free sanitary products. So
I just thought because you were up against the old money, I thought,
yeah,
no chance, you know.
I'm just smiling diplomatically here. It's like, who's on this call? Hello, Karen, how are you? I've not seen you for ages in person. Well, obviously.
Yeah, I'm all right. How have you been?
Not bad, not bad.
That's good. Bit nervous.
Oh, you'll be great. Just be yourself. You're absolutely brilliant. Have you made up your mind yet about the uni place?
No, well, I've got two offers, but the course that I want today, it's still no back. It's Stirling, and I've got one offer back for Stirling.
Right.
So I'm hoping the second offer comes in. So it's politics and social policies is the course that I want today, but I've been offered a place in social policies history with professional education. I
Brilliant.
just need to wait and see what happens.
Well, it's good to have some options, so that'll be great.
I know. And then once they do get qualified, Nicola Sturgeon's done for.
There'll be no holding you back. I've been talking a lot about that time when we had the meeting with the mental health minister.
Aye.
She was very quiet.
No, Churchill nodding dog.
No, you were great. How are the kids?
Aye, they're all right. I've had to bribe Luke to make sure he's quiet.
No, oh, that's a shame.
So he's been bribed with V-Bucks if he stays quiet.
Hi, Bob.
Hi Monica, how you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, good. Good to see you.
You
How
too.
how are things? And you know, I'm asking this question a totally non-political way whatsoever. But what a heck of a campaign you've been through. How are you and the family? Because it's a lot to go through.
I'm doing all right. I've just been doing normal mum things today, like washing the kitchen floor and finding the Hoover and stuff again. But this week's been busy because of the TV debates. But you just have to take it one day at a time, really, don't you? It's just the way it is. But I'm all right.
Good, more power to you anyway. I'm glad to see you doing it.
Right, guys, just to let you know, I am going to go live on Facebook in the next few minutes, and then obviously we'll let everybody before 6, but just be aware that at any point you'll see a wee dot up the top there just saying that we're going live, so just don't say shit or bugger.
I may as well just leave right now then.
I know. I'll probably say both and worst.
Sam's having a bit of technical difficulty. He can't get his camera to work, so he's going to reboot his computer real quick.
Yeah, we've got plenty of time.
Annemarie, can someone just quickly tell us the running order again? Just
Sure.
for
We
people
have,
like me who
first
don't
of
know.
all, yeah, no problem at all. We have Darren's up first. And then we have Suzanne Z. Dyke, Ian Keegan Smith, Ian Smith, Bob Doris, Douglas Ross, but he's not going to come, so there'll be a bit of a space there. Yourself, Monica, then Karen, then Sam, then Lee, then Natalie to close.
Great.
And you'll be relieved to hear I'm not actually going to be saying anything. I'll just be introducing everybody and making a wee comment as we go. But I'm just going to get us live now. And I don't know if we'll be able to keep up with what's going on Facebook and what's going elsewhere, but we'll do our best. So.
Is Lockie away? Is Lockie still in?
I think he might have just switched his camera off. Oh, has he gone?
He's not in my viewer.
Yeah, maybe he's gone. Just preparing the live stream preview. Is he still there, Natalie? Is he gone out the room altogether?
Can't see him at all, Annemarie.
Well, we might not have any luck in him.
Nope, there he's there.
Back. Sorry, I got cut off there.
That's all right. We thought we'd lost you.
Oh, I don't know what happened. My Zoom just crashed, and then I tried to log back in, and it was saying I was in the meeting. It's just some carry on. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm having a wee bit of trouble getting us live on Facebook. Bear with me.
I'm going to break the power of how I'm feeling, by the way. I have to say, like, I'm really nervous. And I'm singing the Eminem song in my head, you know that song, Palms Are Sweaty, Mam's Spaghetti. That's what's in my head right now, because I'm like, break the power, break the power.
It's a bit
Yeah.
that's the only Eminem song that's actually appropriate.
I know.
Nice one for that, Natalie, because I feel the same.
Good.
Feel really nervous. Really nervous.
It'll be amazing, Leah.
Preparing the live stream preview again.
When do you want me to start letting people in, Annemarie? What time?
You could try it at 6, well, or when I get us live, if you just hang on. This was so easy. They've updated it since the last time we went live.
Anne-Marie, see, before you go live, can I ask a wee housekeeping question? How long is the event running for? Not that I'm doing anything else, but I'm kind of 3-line whip to put my way into bed, and there's a 5-year-old going to be packed in front of me probably about 6:30, and I'll be told, get on with it, Bob.
No, that's cool. I totally understand. It's 2.5 hours we're scheduled to go for, but please feel free to leave at any point, because you will be able to watch it on Facebook afterwards, because I do believe I've just managed to put us live. Does it say we're live on your Facebook, on your screen somewhere?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Oh, that's fantastic. So admit all, Natalie. Yeah. Okay, wow. So if I could just ask the speakers to put in their reaction, place their wee hands up, just so as when it comes to your turn to speak, we can easily find you and unmute your mic. That's fab. Just welcome everybody who's joining us as we speak. So I'm going to put us on speaker view. If you would like to mute your microphones, everybody, unless you are speaking, we would really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I am going to just check you all out there in the gallery, and I'm going to make our Anne-Marie a co-host as well, just so she can keep an eye on stuff. Thank you. Welcome everybody to the Favour UK, SISCO and Marriott Communications event this evening. We're delighted to have so many of you with us, and so many of you also joining us live on Facebook. Thank you. We hope that you find tonight's event both useful and inspiring, and that, like us, it lights a wee fire in helping us to help people who are still suffering and who are finding it difficult to get access to services and who are falling through the many cracks in our systems. I'm just going to quickly run through our running order just for those of you who have just joined us. So my name's Annemarie Ward. I'm the CEO of Faces and Voices of Recovery UK, and I'll be your host this evening. We will be going for 2.5 hours most probably. Although we may run on, and if we do run on, or if you need to leave at any point, please just do so. If you do have any questions as the conversations are happening, we would ask you to put them in the chat box, but there's no guarantee that they'll get answered. But if our speakers are still available at the end, that would be fab if they can. So the running order will be myself, obviously hosting, then Darren McGarvey, Dr. Suzanne Zeedyke, Ian Smith, Bob Doris, Monica Lennon, Karen Mckeon, Samuel Marriott Down and Lee Howell, and then the beautiful, courageous and brave Natalie Logan MacLean is going to summarise and end for us. Depending on time, there may be an opportunity for people to contribute, but we've got a lot of chat here, but please feel free to contribute in the chat box and on the Facebook chat. As I said, you may not get your questions answered right away, but hopefully the speakers and ourselves will get back to you. If not in the moment, certainly in the next couple of days. So all that's left for me to do really is, as I said, is to welcome you all and to just thank you for coming and for being interested in the work that we're trying to do, and the way that we're trying to highlight how much difficulty there is in getting access, not just to services and choice of services, but services that are helpful and not contributing to our own addictions or mental health failings, and how sometimes those gaps in services in themselves can be quite a minefield and quite a difficult's not even a proper word to use. You know, it can be an absolute horrendous navigation exercise to try and access services. The amount of stamina and tenacity and courage required just to get access to some services is quite unbelievable. So if you're here tonight and you feel the same way about that, please stick with us and please help us going forward. But with that, I'm going to start tonight's proceedings by handing over to Darren, the wonderful Darren McGarvey, who is not only a friend and comrade in recovery, but he's also becoming more and more of a, I don't know what you would call it, Darren, but certainly a powerful and influential commentator on many things, but in particular what we've asked him to speak about tonight, which is social class and lack of equality. So over to you, Darren.
Thanks very much, Annemarie. Lovely to see you. Hello to my fellow speakers, and welcome to everyone who is at this event. I'm going to fire through this quite rapidly. I just have some vague notes that I'll elaborate on slightly. But basically what I'm interested in talking about and maybe bringing to some of your attention, if you haven't considered it already, is the subtle role that class inequalities in areas of divergence where different social class experiences are concerned, how these can find expression within some of the dynamics that we regularly refer to in reference to the drug crisis. Dynamics that take place within pharmacies, within doctor surgeries, within other healthcare systems, dynamics that take place at every single level of governance, where you have a clash of sensibilities, a clash of interests, and ultimately it becomes a question of where does power lie and who's more trusted. So I want to focus on 3 areas, but first just need to give the brief definitions out there in play when it comes to class, because it's a very nebulous topic. Everyone has a slightly different conception of what class is as a concept, what class entails, the extent to which it even exists. So you've got the kind of the definition of class as being a person's relationship to the labour market. Other people will define class by earnings, by education, by cultural interests and experiences. The media defines class slightly differently from what how the government would define it. And obviously study after study reveals that the average person's concept of class is increasingly vulnerable to their own subjectivity. So a lot of people out there think that they're working class when they're actually middle class, and a lot of people out there think they're middle class when they're actually working class. So what I try to do is ground discussion in class around 3 central themes: proximity, language, and interests. And so I'll just go through these briefly and give some examples of what I mean. And I'll let you decide for yourselves how these map on to the discussion around drug deaths and the drug sector generally. So proximity is, you know, the distance between you and me, the distance between me and the issue, the distance that a politician is from the front line of the issues over which they preside. So imagine a fire's taking place, right? Here's a hypothetical for you. Imagine there's a fire, a house fire's taking place, and it's being viewed from 3 different vantage points in a community. It's being viewed from the perspective of the mother who is in the household where the fire is happening. It's being viewed from outside the house by a GP who happens to be walking past the house and can tell something's not right, and it might be a fire, but isn't totally up on the facts about what's going on. And then the third vantage point is just a politician, you know, taking their dog for a walk on a hillside, looking over the community, and all they see is a smoke plume on the horizon. So proximity there, how that scales, it's really key to understanding the different sense of the varying degrees of understanding about what is occurring, the varying degrees of urgency about what is occurring, and then also for information to get up and down that chain, it has to travel a vast distance. It has to travel through various cultural filters. It has to land on someone's to-do list, and depending on how important it feels to them, then it either is priority or low priority. So obviously, only when you start to take consideration of all of these different vantage points, then you begin to understand how something that seems simple to a person in a community who's experiencing something firsthand might not seem quite as urgent to somebody who's experiencing it from a distance and able to observe it in less detail. And that's partly why this concept of lived experience is so vital. Not necessarily lived experience of the individual, no lived experience as in what's my experience as an individual, because there's all sorts of subjectivity there and false memory and layer of narrative, and me subtly revising my life story every few years because I've changed, and all of the things that you erase from your memory. But when you survey people at scale, then themes will emerge regardless of what they do and don't tell you. And it's lived experience at scale that helps us to understand, and that helps to mitigate or offset some of the disadvantages where we have a lot of people with very low proximity to issues who are also in charge of how these issues are discussed, how important these issues are in relation to other issues, and the general sense of urgency and resource that's applied. The second area is language. Now, language, you know, if you look at language attitude surveys, you'll find an interesting fact, and the interesting fact is that the language that's least prevalent in the UK, the least spoken accent, is also the most trusted accent, right? And that's your kind of BBC announcer accent, right? So when we hear that accent, it's just implicit that what we're being told is the truth, right? And no matter what region people come from, no matter what they think of other regions' accents, Glaswegian is one of the least popular accents in the UK. But no matter what people think of each other's accents, everybody trusts the BBC accent. And it's so subtle. People might say, oh, F the BBC, I'm not paying my license fee, da-da-da-da-da. But there's a part of them which has been socially conditioned by hearing this accent on TV, with all of the kind of contextual signifiers of authority. So there's a part of what it is that we trust. Now, If you go into any school, you go into any doctor's surgery, you go into any parliament, you go into any institution, public institution, what you're going to find are people who come from a certain social class, and part of their signifier of being part of that social class is to sound a little bit like the BBC announcer. So it's all in how their R's roll off the tongue. It's whether they pronounce the T in latte. It's very, very subtle. Now, not everybody does it. Not everybody conforms to it, but everybody feels that they switch their whole vocal anatomy up slightly when they're in a certain kind of company, when they're in a certain kind of environment. And so this is referred to in sociology as studied informality, where there's not necessarily any practical reason for people to do this. It's just how they ingratiate themselves in a particular social group. It's the exact same phenomenon that's occurring in those middle class groups and middle class institutions as what occurs with drug addicts who hang around in crack dens and places where they hang around, and they develop a certain way of speaking that's associated with them. It's the exact same thing. They're trying to fit in. They're trying to say, I'm part of the in-group, and they partly do this by making modifications to their speech over time, which happens so slowly and incrementally that a person doesn't realise it's occurring as it is occurring. Now, that wouldn't matter if it was a level playing field, but where it does matter is when you're dealing with officialdom. So when you're dealing with companies, when you're dealing with institutions, when you're dealing with organisations, and they not only have the vocal range to switch into that studied informality and adopt those different ways of speaking in certain environments, but they also have access to a very exclusive language, the language of officialdom, the language of internal institutions, and that's full of little words which also act as signifiers. You'll hear people talking in reference to making funding applications, things like buzzwords, and you have to jump through hoops when you're filling out funding applications. Basically, a funding application is screening you. It's screening you for your understanding of the language of officialdom, and people who understand that, they are more successful in applying for funding, irrespective of how effective they actually are working in the community. So to understand the role that language plays and how language relates specifically to class, we know that people who come from lower class backgrounds, and I don't mean low as in decreased status in relation to the other. I mean in terms of economic, in terms of the economic experience of society, people who experience it a bit more difficult, people who are always having to bargain to be paid fairly and treated fairly, whose whole geographical relationship with work has been completely revolutionised in the last 30 years as the whole nature of the labour market has absolutely shifted, displacing entire communities from employment opportunities, right? Those people, they tend to speak a certain way, right? They tend to speak a certain way. They tend to have a certain proximity to certain issues. So they tend to have a certain urgency about those issues, and that is often reflected in how they speak about those issues. But on the other side of the fence, what you have are people who have low proximity to those issues, and they have a value system about what being polite entails and what the proper way of speaking is. And that's not just reflected in terms of the words that people use. That's not just reflected in terms of the understanding of officialdom, but also the emotional resonance of how people express themselves. So what can often happen is that a person who has really close proximity to an issue, who's impacted directly by it and has subsequently developed a value system based on that, and part of that is about expressing emotion because they are affected, they can be dismissed from discussions about how we deal with certain issues because of the emotions that they express. Because in this other value system, everybody has to be polite, everybody has to be calm, and to operate it with those parameters can make you a bit of a pariah, can get you labelled difficult, can get you labelled a troublemaker. And that's just part of the studied informality of the institutions. It flags up potential threats to the status quo. And so sometimes then language, we can fall into these pitfalls where basically, again, it comes down to a power dynamic. So a person who's on methadone walks into a chemist, not only are they rattling a bit, but they've just been told they're getting kicked out of their house. One of their mates has died, another one of the 3 deaths that they've experienced in the last few months. They walk into a chemist, they're having a terrible day. They present socially as somebody who's extremely stressed. A pharmacist from Bearsden clocks them and finds them to be aggressive, and they get kicked out the pharmacy. Or something happens in the administering of the treatment that they require gets disrupted because a professional makes a value judgment, and there's no mechanism that exists for a person going in there who's been told to piss off because of the way they speak or the way they present socially. There's no way for them to redress that balance. So these are some of the subtleties in how class can find expression. There's one particular example which strikes me, which is when I was working in POSO a few years ago, and I met with a gentleman who had he was telling me about his 4th heart attack. He's suffering from the kind of multi-morbidity that you hear about in these sort of areas, health problems that arise not out of poor lifestyle choices, but that arise out of the violent severing of social bonds and connections when communities are demolished and people are dispersed with no thought to the shared history, the shared values, the shared language, the shared proximity. And so people develop illnesses at the level of groups and social networks as a result of that. And so he was one such individual. And what happened was he explained to me how he knew he was having a heart attack because he had had heart attacks before. And he decided that he wasn't going to go to the hospital. And he decided he wasn't going to go to the hospital because he was fed up with doctors not listening to him. And so he stayed in his house and he just had his heart attack. And he went to his local GP the next day. The local GP who he was in first name terms with, who understood the situation intimately, who had close proximity to him, who had walked alongside him for long enough that she became intuitive to how he spoke, became intuitive to his sense of urgency and how that was expressed in his emotions and his language. And so there was less kind of tone policing going on, and a natural rapport developed between them because they were allowed to form a relationship. And this is just one example of where sometimes we get it right and sometimes we get it wrong. Now, the final point I just want to touch on is interests, and I think where a class analysis is less susceptible to being dismissed is when we talk about interests, because interests are something that are a bit more quantifiable. So if we just talk about the drug crisis in terms of vague platitudes like we all want to reduce the drug deaths, right? We all believe that people suffering with drug addiction should get support, then that's fine. But that doesn't tell us much about the different interests in play with the different actors that are involved in all of this. So just as the landlord and a tenant might both believe in the concept of houses, right? You talk to a landlord, say, do you believe in hussies? Landlord will be like, I believe in hussies. You talk to their tenant, do you believe in hussies? Aye, I believe in hussies. Okay, cool. Landlords and tenants, they're all on the same page. But if you go to the landlord and ask, why have you got a tenant? Well, I need a tenant to pay my other mortgage on my other house. And why are you putting the rent up? Because cost of living's gone up and this is passive income for me. Then you talk to the tenant, what do you need? I need my rent lowered. The cost of living's gone up. Landlord's hammering me every month. Politicians are on the side of the landlord. I'm getting evicted during the pandemic. So you have to go into what the interests are, because if you just gauge people based on the values that they profess, then that's a very low resolution way of understanding what is actually going on. So when you're navigating the drug sector, or you're analysing where power lies, or you're trying to chart how accountability should be distributed, or any other thing that you're looking at, you have to first understand the interests of the person or the institution that you're dealing with, right? Now, I know that this might not seem central to what we're talking about here. This might seem like a peripheral issue, but it really is key to understanding this. And once you understand this stuff, you can operate with a certain level of strategic confidence and awareness in whatever pursuit you're involved in, because you understand whose interests are what, how that's expressed, does the rhetoric match what is actually happening, all of the stuff around proximity and language, and then it all sort of comes together in a new way that helps you to analyse more objectively rather than a moral outlook exactly what is that's going on. Now, obviously, you make assumptions. Sometimes you might gauge somebody on their accent and you're wrong, and they might gauge you on yours and you're wrong. Sometimes you'll meet people who just don't, who will resist categorization, who will defy being labelled. But ultimately, these general rules that I've outlined, they work more than they don't work, and therefore they should be applied when we're thinking not just necessarily about specific policies in terms of alleviating the suffering of addiction for individuals and families and communities, but understanding these wider dynamics about why is this issue taking so long to become a priority in media and the public domain for politicians, and also understanding some of the context behind how the drug sector is structured and the various layers of governance and the language that's involved at these various layers of governance, and the sort of language that you need to adopt if you either want to criticise that, or if you want to infiltrate that, or if you want to observe that. And so I think the final thing that I'll say is this: how my work is primarily not just about outlining inequalities, but all the time in any work that I do, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to inform and educate people of a certain social class of everything that I've learned as I have moved around this society at various levels. So when we're talking to people who are in recovery and they've got a battle on their hands with whatever it is that they're dealing with, you know, a local service, a particular figure in a certain institution, whatever it is that they're dealing with, when we're working with them, we should not just be monitoring them based on what is their level of dependency, what sort of treatment is it that they want access to. We should also be considering, we should be developing a rapport and understanding all of these other subtler dimensions about how they communicate. It's not about teaching people how to communicate better. It's about arming people with facts about how they're going to be interpreted and the risks that come with that. Because if we can tool people up with an understanding about the broader culture in which they operate, then that is arming them with certain facts about themselves, which helps to add another level of resilience into them, as well as whatever recovery pathway that they might choose. And I'm just going to leave it there, guys. I didn't want to labour the point too much, but hopefully that sort of sets a bit of context and then might recontextualise some of the other things that might get discussed as we go on. So thanks for the opportunity, and I'll just leave it there. Thanks very much.
Yeah, Darren, that was absolutely beautifully put. Thank you so much. Especially the stuff you spoke about with funding applications and the urgency that is in our language. And because we've got that close proximity to what's going on, and how the low proximity from the people who are deciding who gets the funding actually excludes us. And Natalie and I saw that last year with the last big batch of CORA funding. We spent probably weeks putting together funding applications after being encouraged to. And although we've got that strategic oversight, when we attended the CORA the CORA event on the funding, actually, one of the women who I respect deeply in this field came up to me, and she actually said to me, "Now, Annemarie, you have to be good today," like a child. Do you know what I mean? And what she means is similar to what the women in public health told me when I worked there, see if you would just play the game, and if you would just, I'm going to polish you, you know, and do you know, I don't need polished. I'm good enough. So yeah, thank you, Darren. That was absolutely lethally, surgically described. Thank you. Over to you, Suzanne.
Lovely. Hello, everyone. Can I just check you can hear me? Yes? Can you hear me? Fantastic. I am delighted to be here. I'm delighted to follow Darren. I'm delighted to follow and join the other speakers tonight. And I'm really pleased that we are having this discussion. I'm a developmental psychologist, for anybody who doesn't know me. And that means that I have spent a lot of my life trying to understand human development and the impacts of childhood experiences on adulthood and on the way you grow up and how your life functions. And I have become known within the Adverse Childhood Experiences movement in Scotland, which for me is all about human development and the impact of childhood experiences and how we get better at understanding those and thinking about those and how we get curious about those so that we can pay more attention to the pain that children often experience. And for me, addiction comes out of childhood trauma. And the question becomes, how do we help more of us to think about that, put together services that can think about that, understand why so often that is not heard and why we are in so much denial over that. So following in Darren's footsteps, I too put together a few notes, and it's really interesting for me that several of the key words that I wanted to be sure to highlight tonight are some of the same ones that Darren has highlighted, words like urgency and power and the way that we exclude other people in our head by othering them. So first, I just thought for anybody who isn't familiar with the language of childhood trauma as related to addiction, basically what the science has taught us over 75 years is that if you have a childhood where you have to deal with scary things without the help of a relationship that is attuned to you emotionally, that can help you to carry that fear, then it produces a physical change in your body because you end up with a stress system. And there's tons of research that now helps us to understand that addiction comes out of a stress system. And in fact, sometimes addiction has been called ritualized compulsive comfort seeking. And people have argued that if we called it that instead of addiction, we would understand that what has happened is that your regulatory system, how you handle stress in life, has become really stretched, has become really fragile, and that you need help. And substances like alcohol, drugs, and smoking and eating help with that. When you're struggling and you have difficulty comforting yourself and you can't do that internally, then you look externally to do that. And drugs and alcohol are a great way to help with that. Now, they produce other consequences in your body, which then make it hard to get out of that way of coping, which is how you end up in cycles. But if we just understood that it was looking for comfort seeking, we could start to change the kinds of treatments we offer and the kind of preventions that we offer. And here's the thing, it's not that difficult, and it's not new, and it's not news. We have known versions of that for at least 75 years. That was through attachment science. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, is an extension of that, a new name for that. But the idea that childhood trauma produces adult consequences isn't new. What's much more interesting is to ask, how come we can't face up to it? And how come we don't have systems that are set up for that? And how come we spend so much time in denial? And how come we don't get that relationships are both prevention and solution? So that's another word that Darren just used, is the importance of relationships. Okay, so, and in questions, I am really happy to elaborate on the details of how that works if anybody wants. But the key idea there is that childhood distress that can come from a whole range of sources, if you don't have somebody to help you with it, it is much more likely to leave this consequence on your body. Okay, so secondly, we have known about this for a long time, and we have known about it in relation to addiction for a long time. So in preparation for tonight, I pulled up just some papers that have been around for a long time. So here's Vincent Felitti, who was the author of the Adverse Childhood Experiences study in 1998, writing in 2004. That's nearly 2 decades ago now. And he had this to say, and I put it on Twitter today for anybody who wants to read it in more detail. He said, "The current concept of addiction is ill-founded. Our study of the relationship of adverse childhood experiences to adult health in over 17,000 patients shows addiction to be a readily understandable, although largely unconscious attempt to gain relief from well-concealed prior life traumas by using psychoactive materials." Okay, so that's fancy, sciencey language to say you carry the consequences of childhood trauma. My point is that that paper is 2004. How many people have died in Scotland in 2 decades since that paper was written? Let's go backwards to the 1930s when people were doing research on attachment and the consequences of war trauma and of being separated from your parents to cope with incoming bombs. So we sent lots of children to the countryside to protect them from bombs. What a lot of people didn't understand is that that would produce trauma for children that they would carry for the rest of their lives. Not everybody, but quite a lot of them. So services didn't intend to cause trauma to children, but they did because they weren't able to hear the science that was around even at that time. Really importantly, it was also applied to children's hospitals. And so parents were separated from children in hospitals, which produced trauma for those children. Now, part of the reason that I wanted to stress that is because there was a total class element to that, backing up what Darren was just spoken about. People could see that it was difficult for children and for the parents if your child went into hospital not to get to stay with them. So what would happen is that your child would come into hospital and it was a Tuesday and you weren't allowed to come and see them as their parent until Saturday for an hour. And there were lots of psychologists, scientists saying, we don't think that this standard way of treating children is good for them. And we think that we should change services. You know, the people who got to see their children, it was the folks in the upper classes. It was the children and the families in the lower classes who were much more likely to be subject to that policy. In other words, the science that was coming out that said relationships were really important and that trauma was likely to be caused long-term if you didn't pay attention to relationships. It could have been used to help the masses, but given that so many of the masses were lower working class, that's who suffered the most from clinicians and systems not being able to listen to what was already becoming clear. So I'm trying to give an example of the ways in which in the past, in systems, the science has said, pay attention to relationships and pay attention to distress, and systems have not been able to listen. And systems have discriminated by class in exactly the way that Darren has just outlined for us. And if I look at one of the quotes from that period by one of the scientists who was trying to make a difference, like Vincent Felitti, and like so many people who have contributed to the ACEs movement now, this was said. And it's got the word urgency in it, which was one of Darren's words. At more senior levels, those who are all the time associated with situations of stress, like the executive officers with absorbing administrative responsibilities, and the childcare officers with too heavy a caseload, they become distanced from the problem and they lose the sense of urgency, which goes with full awareness. I had already pulled that out. That's basically restating some of the points that I think Darren is trying to make, that when you end up too distanced, you just don't see the problem. So you create new problems because you're not addressing the actual core problem. And one of the things that I have learned from Favor and from colleagues who work in what we're talking about tonight, because I work across so many different sectors and systems, is that a key part of the problem is that we have focused in Scotland on harm reduction and on treatment of symptoms without actually looking at the trauma that is at the heart. So we don't have enough rehabilitation in Scotland because people aren't focused on rehabilitation and on recovery. We're focused on harm reduction. And so our lens is shaped by how close or far we are from the problem. So let me end with one final question. Why can't we see that? Why am I talking about things all the way back to the 1930s? Why is the problem still the same? Why am I quoting from people who wrote in the 1970s about the importance of urgency? I think there are three key things that block our ability to see this. One is medical models. So we have all these medical models that explain addiction. So to talk about it as childhood trauma is a different lens. That's what Vincent Felitti was trying to get people to do 2 decades ago, was to adopt the explanation that we have of addiction. Second is othering. So we treat people from other classes, we see them in a different way. We use language that lets us other people like junkies. There are all sorts of ways to other people and therefore to discount them. And we do it all the time in our society. And that's part of what is happening here, is we just treat people like others. And then we have a right not to be curious. So that would be my third point, is that if we could get more curious, it sounds so simple, but we're not curious enough about children's distress because we don't think they remember it. And we're not curious enough about the pressures that other people live under. And we're not curious enough about the scars that people carry. That's the point of white privilege. That's the point of male privilege, of misogyny, is that we're not curious enough about the experiences of people in other groups. And that feeds denial. So somehow we have to get those of us who can see it from another perspective that the power of existing systems can't see it from, have to find ways to counter denial. It sounds so obvious. What do you think Black Lives Matter is about? It's about trying to counter denial. But the more that I understand that denial of suffering is part of the problem, then I have a new element in the same way that Darren is talking about. Part of my job is to counter the denial of suffering. And if I can alter my language to do that, and if I can alter anything else that helps to cut through that, that's part of the solution. I hope you can hear the frustration in my voice that we have been doing this for 80 years. And I think it's time that we stop childhood suffering is the source of, if we paid attention to childhood suffering, we would tackle perhaps just about every societal challenge we have. So I think that's where we start. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much. That felt amazing. I felt my heart was beating beside you, Suzanne. I felt every single word of that. Thank you. And you're so right. The current policy initiative that we welcome, you know, the new money for rehab from Scottish Government that we welcome with open arms, but it will require professional and organisational humility and acknowledging historical mistakes, but also cultural resistance will prevent barriers to successful implementation. There's no doubt about that. We've got a system that's been pretending we don't need rehab for 20 years. You know, so it's going to take a fair old bit of humility to get us into a place where that becomes the norm again. And like you said, you know, if we went back, if we take it right back to childhood and children, you know, we could make great progress across the board. I firmly believe that as well. Thank you so much. I felt all of your emotion there. I felt every part of it, and I'm sure others did as well.
And Marie, I'm just basically really impatient because I don't think that we should do this anymore. And if I added to my list of privileges, what that means is that we also have professional privilege. And that's why we need the voices of lived experience, because that brings that alternative perspective. The thing is, I don't think I'm saying something that's surprising to most folks that are here, but the really interesting question is, why is that so hard to break through that barrier?
Yeah, and for us, the lived experience, it has to be more than tokenistic or controlled or steered lived experience. Like, it has to be autonomous and independent. Lived experience, you know, it cannot be government quangos putting forward and trotting people out who they know what they're going to say. It has to be real, authentic, autonomous and independent voices.
It has to change the values of the system.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. And I'm just going to go straight over now to Ian Smith, who is going to join us. Ian, if you just unmute yourself, that would be fabulous. Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah, thanks very much, Annemarie and everyone else. Annemarie was able to gauge Suzanne's feeling Suzanne's emotion. Hopefully she'll be feeling mine, which is I'm crapping myself, but there we go. How to follow your two heroes, Darren McGarvey and then Suzanne Zeedyk. Thanks very much for this graveyard shift, but I'll give it a go. It basically, thanks to Suzanne and Tina Henry, about 3 years ago, I was introduced to the concept of childhood trauma and the impact on the developing brain. And that was from the perspective of being a criminal defense lawyer at that point for 25 years. And discovering that during that whole time, I had not seen the very people before me who every day I thought I was helping. And then I realized that ultimately I wasn't, because I wasn't seeing the people who were before me in the justice system. So that science about, they call it ACEs or adverse childhood experiences, I tend to call it childhood trauma, it transformed me probably overnight as a person, but more importantly for today's purposes, it transformed me as a lawyer. That language and information allowed me to understand that when I was viewing clients, I was able to view what was lying underneath their addiction. And then at that point, realizing that what we were doing in the system that I work in, the criminal justice system, was the futility of punishing people gripped by addiction and trying to punish people out of their trauma, whether they weren't able to self-regulate. And that was a complete eye-opener for me, and immediately saw different things in the system I worked. It made me realize that the system we have is one of retribution rather than repair. And when it comes to childhood trauma and all that, the impact of that on the people that I engage with, that repair over retribution is what's required. And at the moment, because we don't have that, we've just got a revolving door of people coming in and out of this system. At no time, I think, did I really ever view or call my clients Neds or junkies or scum but I'd maybe use the offhand phrase punter, just effectively to detach myself from the people that I was dealing with. And as a result of me changing, I also now want the system that I work in to change. And I've been shouting about it. I've been doing that from individual clients daily in court. But I've been asking and questioning judges about what I would see as the holy grail of court, to make judges preside with kindness, and how to refocus that. And at times I think people think I'm mad in doing so, because how could judges ever be kind? Certainly if you come to court and you watch what happens in court, you'll realise why someone would question whether that was possible. But I know that it is possible, and I know certainly the change in me has resulted in a change in my clients and how they respond, and to some extent how social workers are responding, how prosecutors respond, police officers, and to some extent my fellow defence lawyers. I'm going to give you three short examples of the impact of this, and the first one's from a judge's perspective. I managed to go to a talk by a judge who had spent 18 years on the bench, and in her farewell speech, she described remembering the journey that she had during her 18 years, and one of the first people she met was a young girl who was going through the system, drug addicted, in and out of court for thefts and all the things, peripheral things, drug possession, but all the things associated with drug addiction, where you run out of money, leads you into the criminal justice system. And she describes this girl following the route of her judicial career, including on the last day she appeared as a judge in court. And she describes how she got down from the bench, she took her wig and gown off, and she hugged the girl to let the girl know that she cared about her, which I think was a very wonderful act and lovely. And I was at this talk, and this is quite early on in my own journey about understanding my clients a little bit better. And I put my hand up, and feeling a wee bit brave, certainly more brave than I do just now, I asked her what she thought the girl's life would have looked like if she'd hugged her the first time she'd met her in court rather than the last time. And by that, I don't mean that judges need to hug clients, but effectively, if we as a justice system really want to have a more compassionate system, then metaphorically, we need to hug people and express when we see damage in people that we care for them and that we do something different for them and not just punish them, because it doesn't help. And I felt bad for saying that to her, because the judge involved is a very active judge now in various charities, including I was previously a trustee at Aid and Abet, and she assisted us with that and uplifted the work that these guys were doing, and is now an activist about bringing about judicial change. So that was one example from judges about recognising. She wasn't praising herself for hugging the girl, but effectively saying, could you do something differently, but much earlier on? The next one really comes from a client's perspective. I met a young guy, it's about a year ago now, going through Edinburgh Sheriff Court. And he appeared from custody, and what he had done wrong was that he'd failed to comply with his community payback order, and he'd breached the order. And I appeared before the judge from custody with him, and I explained that he'd been abused, he'd been neglected, he'd been placed in care, he'd been given heroin by his mother when he was 13 years of age. But somehow or other, through his own efforts and with the assistance of services, which on this occasion were at hand, had managed to get himself his own home, had managed to get prescription medication from his doctor, sorted out benefits, some levels of counselling, and had engaged with experienced persons and mentors who'd walked in the path before him. And the angry judge asked me a very open question and asked me, what do you say I should do with him? Given that she'd asked me an open question, I gave her a fairly open and forthright answer, which was, praise him. What did you say? I said, praise him. I shouted at her. Now, the boy didn't get remanded that day, although he and I were very close to getting found in contempt. But 4 weeks later, come back to court, armed with the reports, letters of reference. The judge had it all before her. And as I stood up, She ordered me to sit down and not to say a word. And I thought, here we go. But for the next 10 minutes, she managed to praise that boy and told him how well he had done, and to make him feel better, as he described after he'd appeared in court, than he'd ever done in his life. And it was the first time anyone had ever been properly kind to him in authority, and it had given him hope. And I always regret not asking to see the judge in chambers, just to explain the effect that her kindness and recognition and offering of hope and perseverance had on that young man, because it had a huge effect on me, seeing the difference in him by what she had done. And she didn't have to get taught that, and she didn't have to get retrained, and it didn't cost any money. It was about compassion. Just, I'm conscious of time, so moving on to a third aspect. So one of the other things I've been doing over 3 years is generally saying, I work in West Lothian, and we created a hub for adverse childhood experiences within education, within health, and within the justice system. And we went out and we were talking to various groups and people. And one of the groups was a group of teachers, and we'd screened the film by the late and great James Redford called Resilience. And after it, one of the teachers, this was pre-COVID obviously, she asked me, or she said to me, I can tell you now who your clients will be in the next few years from my class. And that immediately disappointed me. And I said to her, I can tell you now, you are the person or one of the people who can change that child's trajectory in a very positive way. And I think sometimes we're so busy looking at other people or other services about what they're not doing, that maybe we should just ask ourselves what it is we can do in our own little worlds that we work in, or the different things we do, as we can see demonstrated by Annemarie and Natalie, and the great work that Darren's doing, and Suzanne and everyone else, that actually just ask ourselves, what is it we can do to change that and influence it? And I'm pretty sure there's quite a lot. I certainly never thought I'd be speaking amongst the great people that are speaking today. I'm dyslexic. I struggle with doing things like this, because I realise actually to do this, not many people in my world are talking about it. Not many lawyers are saying about compassion or hope or perseverance and doing these things, and hopefully they will. What finally, just in terms of a positive way to leave you, we've created a small group of like-minded lawyers called the Trauma Aware Lawyers Group, and we've managed to engage over the past few weeks with various universities in Scotland who teach the next generation of lawyers. And one thing all the educators have agreed to do is train all their students who are going to study law, for example, about trauma. That will make a massive difference. I've also engaged with the body called the Judicial Institute, who train all judges in Scotland. And as Darren describes, tooling people up, I'm asking that the judges get tooled up, again with knowledge rather than with knives or hammers, but for judges to get tooled up with this knowledge, because frankly, at the moment when I'm talking to them about the language of childhood trauma, it's as if I'm talking a foreign language and they don't get it. So they need to be trained on this. And finally, there's about to be a massive change potentially in what's called the Sentencing Council, and that's a body that provide guidelines for all judges in Scotland. And what they have done in their draft guidelines is to change the age of how we view a young person in court from that of 21 to up to the age of 25. And that matches or in some ways shadows the science, Suzanne would tell you better than I could, about the development of the childlike brain or the young brain. Some people say it develops up to the age of 30, but as a start, we start looking at people in the justice system up to the age of 25 as a young person. And they will also take into account, they've not called it childhood adversity or childhood trauma, but really they're telling judges they've got to look at this. Now, none of this will work unless judges understand what that is. And I'm hoping that's exactly what will happen. Because once they know about the science, once they know about the impact of trauma and the lives, the sexual abuse of children who then become adults who are angry, who self-soothe on drugs and alcohol, that surely if I were a judge, which I'm not and I never will be, but that if I were a judge, I would surely look at that person in front of me with compassion and want to repair rather than punish them. And once we understand that, we will have a much better justice system. But those are the potential changes that need to happen. I'll stop speaking because I know there's others who are behind me to speak. So thanks very much for giving me this opportunity to speak, and very privileged to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. There's like much love for you in the chat, and lots of big hands going up in the room. I don't know if you can see that, but
I couldn't.
You know, I do hope that one day you are a judge, and that those systems that we are speaking about will listen to voices like yours. I feel like much of what's been said tonight and what you're saying, you know, we're talking about early adopters here and pioneers, and, you know, systems change. And it also feels to me like there's an opportunity, because of the extraordinary times that we're living in, to re-steer the ship, you know, and to change things. So your voice, amplifying our voice, is tremendously important, and you standing beside us and supporting us, you know, right from the minute we asked you to get involved, there was no doubt, there was only actually humour and love, you know. That's what you gave back to, yeah,
the cash,
you gave it.
There was the cash as well, remember.
So yeah, just humour and love, man. So we thank you for that, and you did a brilliant job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm just going to hand over now to the next person on the list. That is, I think it's your Bob Doris. Is that you, my friend? Yes, it is. Over to you, Bob.
Thanks very much, Annemarie. I kind of feel like we did more listening than talking, to be honest with you, but thanks for inviting me to speak at the event. I should maybe stress at the start, I'm not speaking in a capacity as a party politician, but as the MSP for Maryhill and Springburn, and by that, what I see in my constituents in terms of who actually comes to me to seek support, help and assistance. Because actually, I think Darren said right at the start about how close or distanced you are from what's actually really happening on the ground and what your perspective is. And I think there's a lesson to be learned on who actually makes their way to seek support from a parliamentarian's office. And very often it's really the person whose life is needing support, is in addiction, has a chaotic lifestyle and really needs that support. In my experience, by and large, it tends to be families that come to my office. And I went back and I looked over, unfortunately, far too many occasions where I've been trying to support families, and it's mums or dads or aunts or uncles or brothers or sisters that comes and seeks support. And I thought, given that tonight's about lived experience, I don't have that lived experience. So my lived experience of the folk who reach out to me. So I wanted to give 3 examples of that, Annemarie, just to see the type of things that folk contact me about. I can think particularly about a parent who contacted me regarding that their son had been on the methadone programme for, well, they would say too long, but they didn't come to me because of that. They came to me because they knew their son had underlying mental health issues and vulnerabilities, and every time they went to seek help, support and assistance from the NHS for that, they were told, well, your son's still using, so we're not even assessing this guy until he gets himself off the drugs he's using. And that went on for a long time. Now, that's not a way to run a caring service, and I know that's something that needs to be looked at. So I say that with full self-awareness. It's not the only time that has happened, but again, it wasn't the person who was in need of help and support, and of course families need help, needing support as well, but the family members who came and contacted me, that's happened far too often, actually. A few things I've actually said, and this is something that happens a lot to councillors, MPs, MSPs. Folk come and talk to you about, oh, we've got a nuisance neighbour, or this person above them or below them is antisocial or whatever, and there's always more to a story. And one story in particular I remember is, again, when I was a mum this time, came to me and they said, look, my child's going to get evicted for their property. They're not staying there that often. We are there. I'm not sure who's in the house. I'm not sure what's going on. again, their words, not my words, they said to me, do you know, they probably shouldn't be staying in that property because it's not meeting their needs. It's that they're getting into all kinds of problems. They need support, and there's no one reaching out. On that particular occasion, we actually got the health service and housing to listen, and rather than an eviction, we managed to get not the best intervention for that person. But I suppose the point I'm trying to make is too many times in my caseload, folk are moving to evict because they see a problem rather than saying, well, what's really going on here? And that was one occasion. But again, it's not the person who's in need of help. It's a mum or a dad that's coming to see me. It's not the person. It's a granny that comes to see me. It's not the person. And that creates problems as well, because I hate to use the expression data protection, but I'm writing to the head of social work, and I'm writing to the NHS, and I'm writing to key workers, and I'm saying, what can you do for this person? And they contact me, and they come back and they say, well, unless that person gives you the permission to, share information, there's not much we can do. So I just feed it in, and I feed it in, and I feed it in. But it's a mum or a dad or an aunt or uncle that's coming to see me. It's really the person who's directly in need of help there and then. I've got a more recent case. This one's unresolved, so I won't say too much about it. But this may be a test for where we are right now. And it's someone, again, in this case, it's a relative that's came to see me. It's not the individual. And this person, when I say life's chaotic and all those things, I'm basically saying the words family members are using to me, right? So I'm not putting that label on someone. That's what family members are saying to me. And very recently, a family member came to me and they said, I know my relative, and again, I'm not saying who the relative is because it's an ongoing case. I don't want identifying an individual. They want help, needing support, and they've been offered support in the community. They don't want to give up on their community, but they know in the community, they know what their triggers are, they know what their issues are, they want to be in recovery, they need to be out that community for a period of time, and it was rehab they're looking for. And they're wanting to be supported out with all the kind of triggers that are driving them to what they're doing. And I'm conscious when I'm saying that I'm not talking about adverse childhood experiences. I'm telling you what parents are saying to me who come to me and say those things. So that's ongoing. I think we'll need to wait and see what happens with that one. But I just want to give like 3 examples of where the folk that are coming to me to reach out for help and support and assistance, it's family members, it's not the individuals. But what family members do tell me is when the son or the daughter or whoever was ready, when they felt they were ready and reached out for support, it wasn't always there. And again, not my words, there's relatives out there that are thinking timing is everything. Sometimes when people know they are ready, there's a window of opportunity sometimes in people's story where if they get the support they're needing at that point, a difference can be made. And too often, and I see this with total self-awareness, that's been lacking and it's not been there. And that's what parents, invariably parents or grands or granddads tell me. I couldn't speak tonight and not mention kinship carers. They're working with Kinship for the North for a long time. And the work they do at picking up the pieces who have lost sons and daughters, not always, but often through drugs, who have got grandkids and are doing amazing jobs. They sometimes also struggle to access services for those children as well. Things have got better, but nowhere near enough. But they sometimes struggle to access services themselves, including, for example, the Notre Dame Centre, which is based in my constituency as well, who do an amazing job working with families, but they need more resource and there needs to be more capacity as well. In terms of me interacting and just hanging out with folk who are trying to recover from drugs, well, I've been to Springburn Recovery Cafe a few times and got some friends there and just chatting with folk. And the thing that's come through time and again is people have said to me, and I'm sorry for saying this, but it's the only experience I can draw on, right? People are saying to me that they don't always feel their addictions worker really knows them, because how can they know they've got 70, 80, 90 folk on their books? They're just a statistic to them, and there's not a relationship. built up there. And I know that needs to be addressed as well. Too many people have also said to me that when they feel they're ready for recovery, when they have a discussion with their GP or their addictions worker, they're told no. Now, I don't know what that conversation looks like, but people are telling me they're told no. And it made me think about something else. We totally changed how we do an aspect of the social care system in Scotland. I was in the health committee when we did it. We introduced something called self-directed support. Now, I'm not pretending that that's an amazing thing. In practice, you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we absolutely changed the principles of how we support people in social care. And that is the person decides, well, you know, are you going to support me in my house when I'm getting old and frail? What's that going to look like? I might want one care come into that house and deciding how I want that to be supported, or I might want it something for the council, or I might want it something from a third party organisation, or I might want to employ someone myself, or I might want to go to a day centre, and that's financially supported. But the underlying principle is self-directed support, and it's about empowering the individual in their later years to decide what they want to happen next. And it's supposed to be empowerment. And I don't see where the empowerment is in terms of where we are with people who are living with addiction and trying to get into recovery or sustain recovery. People have mentioned rehab. I've said lots of times about that. No, people know it's not a magic bullet, but it's a choice, and it's a valid choice for some, and it's been denied for too many. But if you sit down and you have that conversation, as constituents have told me, well, I sat down with addictions worker, I told them what I wanted or needed, and they said, no, that's not what we're doing. Come back in 3 months. Well, we'll maybe have a telephone call in a couple of weeks. That's not how we deal with other aspects. We've actually changed the law in Scotland for social care to put the individual and the family in control of their own care. We need to find a way. I'm one of the politicians that has to find that way. I get that. We have to find a way of putting the individual in control of their own help, support and assistance. And that hasn't happened up until now. So that's my experience as a local MSP. I've deliberately not spoken about some other things, because if you tell stories, you know, people can be identified and people have got the right to confidentiality, but it's mums, it's dads, it's grannies, it's granddads, it's aunts that are contacting my office. It shouldn't take them to reach out to me because there isn't support there for their sons and daughters when they needed it. And we have to fix that. And with kinship carers, they're picking up the pieces that they shouldn't have to pick up. And I know we have to fix that as well. So thank you, Annemarie, for letting me say a few words at tonight's event. The only other thing I would say as well, back at the start, about perspective and distance and power relationships, and you know, people see it from different perspectives. In the last couple of years, Favour UK has really been, I wanted to say been a pain in the arse, but I don't quite mean it that way, because you should be. That's kind of the point I'm making. Because, you know, when you get 200 emails into your inbox, how do you pick out the ones that really matter? And you're attentive to that. And Favour UK has really assisted me in relation to that. And you've been a critical friend. And actually, I really, really thank you for that as well. So thank you for letting me be involved in tonight's event. I know we're at a crossroads with what's happening in terms of the policy landscape and service design and redesign, and challenging, and this is, I promise, the last thing we'll say, challenging a culture and addiction services. There are amazing addiction workers out there. I know there are because I've met them. But just because things have always been done a certain way, and there's a cultural aspect to that. I know Dan was talking about, is there a class aspect or a power relationship aspect to that? But there's a cultural aspect to it that needs to change. And they have to embrace that change. And it's the job of politicians to push that along the way. So thank you for letting me speak tonight. And I'm going to stay online for as long as I can. I get a child to put to bed in about half an hour, so I'll be here for the next half an hour. Thanks, Annemarie.
Thank you very much, Bob. And you know, you are my local MP. I'm just down the road there. And you know, you've always been available and assistant for Natalie and I as well up in Springburn. And you know, I'm quite happy to have the, you know, favour be the thorn in the side or the pain in the arse, because that thorn in the arse brought 255 million into our field. Do you know what I mean? So one of the things that struck me about that though was, you know, the You Keep Talking, We Keep Dying campaign was relentless, and in that it was, you know, recovering people and their families and people in high profile positions and journalists and church leaders who were absolutely heart sore and heartbroken with this situation going on, and there'd been no sight for change. And you know, and it was that tenacity and perseverance of all concerned that brought that extra funding, and the admission from, you know, the government that we've not done enough and that we are responsible and that we need to do something different. And that culture change that's required, it has to be about acknowledging how valuable, and not just how valuable lived experiences are, but how vocal and how powerful that voice can be. That voice just brought 255 million pounds to our field. If it's not recognised and acknowledged, there's something far wrong with the culture of addiction services if they can't doff their cap, you know, when it comes to that. And I can assure you, in Scotland, they're no doffing their cap, but they are across the UK. So, but you know, that's maybe a discussion for another day. With that, thank you so much, Bob. I am going to hand over to the lovely Monica, who has been a fantastic support to us over the last couple of years, and maybe she'll speak a wee bit more about that that investment, because I know that her politics and her personality were central to making that happening as well. Over to you, Monica.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. It's a real honour to be part of this panel tonight and the wider discussion. Darren, Suzanne, Ian and Bob have all been excellent. So I'm feeling a little bit nervous actually, and I don't think I've ever managed to get through a full event that involved Anne-Marie and Natalie without crying, either in Zoom or in real life. And when Ian was speaking, I had to put my camera off to go and grab some tissues. I was holding it together, but I'm glad we're in company tonight that recognises that showing emotion is a good thing, showing compassion is a good thing. So I'm not going to apologise for crying, because that's just my way of doing things. And like Bob, I am a member of the Scottish Parliament. I represent Central Scotland, so that takes in Falkirk, North Lanarkshire and parts of South Lanarkshire. I was elected in 2016, so I'm one of the new MSPs. And one of the constituents who's made the biggest impact on me in my time in Parliament, and someone that I'm really proud to call a friend, is Karen Mckeon. But she's about to speak next. I won't say too much about how I know Karen, but just the fact that Karen is here tonight and is on this panel, that in itself just gives me so much hope for the future. So Karen, just well done, just be you, you're great. So I've been an MSP since 2016, but I first got into politics in 2012. I was elected as a local councillor in the Hamilton area. And one of the very first cases, if we want to call it that, because we talk about casework in politics, don't we, which makes it quite impersonal. But one of the first people that I came into contact with who was struggling with addiction, with trauma, with everything you could imagine, was basically a couple of months into that job as a counsellor. And it was a chance encounter in the council toilets. So it doesn't sound very glamorous, does it? But I was in between meetings, went into the loo, and it was a small space, and there was a woman who was applying makeup to a badly bruised face, and she was applying the makeup really badly. So I didn't want to interfere, but I had to say to her, "Are you okay?" And she wasn't okay. She was in the council building because she was presenting as homeless. She'd been there all afternoon waiting to be seen, and she hadn't been called. She'd been sitting in the waiting room. So because I was a counsellor, I went out to the front desk and said, look, there's a lady in the toilet. She needs some assistance. Can we get her into a room? I'll come in and be part of the discussion. So that happened within about 10 minutes. So it just shows you when a counsellor asks for something, it can happen. But a woman who's in distress, who's been sitting there all day, had been made to wait. So I had another meeting to go to. So I set up the meeting, thought things were going to go well, left to go to my next meeting, and that was it. And then later that day, again, probably just pure chance, I'm driving home and I can see her. Now, she told me some things about herself, so I knew that she was vulnerable. I knew that she'd been the victim of violence. I knew that she had had trauma in her early life, so I wouldn't give too much away. But I saw her walking along the road with a guy, and I thought, who the hell is this guy? So I just pulled up in the car, got out, and we'll just call her Mary, not her name, but we'll just call her that. And I was like, hi, Mary, I met you earlier on today at the council. Everything okay? Because I thought, who is this guy? Because I knew that she was at risk. So he was a pal, actually. He was a good guy. And he was on his way to a homeless facility. But I knew that they wouldn't have a place for her because they didn't take women. So I thought, how is she going to get back to a place of safety? Because they were walking way out of town. So engaging with them, I realised, like, this is somebody who really needs to be in hospital. She had injuries. She was very unwell. So long story short, I managed to persuade her that we would phone an ambulance, and she was taken away in the ambulance with nothing but a handwritten note from me. And I said, look, here's a phone number. I'm one of the local counsellors. If you're going to discharge her, here's where she can go. And I phoned the council. They gave me a number for a place in East Kilbride that takes women. But later that night, I got a phone call from one of the doctors in the hospital, and they thought I was the next of kin. They thought I was the family. And I was like, I just met Mary a couple of hours ago. So they agreed that they were going to keep her in that night. And already I'm getting myself really involved in this, really emotionally involved. So I go up the next day to the hospital with a bag of stuff, clothes, some toiletries, and I go up, and I can only describe it as rattling. Mary at this point is completely rattling. So she's wanting to get out to get a cigarette, and the hospital's really annoyed about that as well. So they were kind of looking down their nose at her, was my view. And I love the NHS and I love the people that work in it. But I just felt Mary's a bit of a problem at the moment to these people where she is right now. She was kept in over the weekend, and we went back to where we started, back to the council offices. So on the Monday morning, I got the council to send a taxi to take it to the council to go back to the housing people. And she eventually got into a place, but because she was drinking while she was in it, they put her out. So you can imagine. So I don't know what happened to Mary after that. I read about her in the paper maybe about a year later, because she'd been at the sheriff court because she'd been in a bit of trouble. So that kind of brings into Ian's world. I don't know if she's dead or alive, but she was someone who had experienced some really bad things at a young age, 13, 14, wasn't believed, and then the trauma just continued. Now, why did I get so involved in Mary's case? Well, looking back, I think it's probably because I had a bit of lived experience myself through my dad, who was an alcoholic. And I know what it's like when people are just seen as the addict, or, you know, the word earlier on that Suzanne referred to, junkie, or, you know, the alcoholic, and people lose their identity, don't they? So my dad, I don't really know when his drinking became a problem. Probably people who know better than me would say the first drink was probably the start of it. But my dad was somebody who was a social drinker, life and soul of the party, and then it just kind of got in the way of things. It got in the way of family relationships, it got in the way of his health, it affected his job. And I suppose if we were to give him a scorecard when it comes to adverse childhood experiences, he would have scored pretty highly based on what we know today. So again, without getting into too much detail, airing all the family washing in public, you know, his childhood was rooted in poverty. there was early trauma. He was also somebody who was very loved. His Irish granny, his aunties had a big job to play in bringing him up, but it wasn't quite a conventional upbringing. And I suppose it was when I was a teenager that my dad's drinking was more visible and became more apparent to me. There was a spell in rehab, which is maybe why in Parliament, Anne-Marie, I've been so passionate about people having even just the chance to access treatment and residential rehab, because we know that in recent years that door has been open to very few people. So that was something that I really wanted to work, and it didn't work out. But in that time, I was kind of following my dad about everywhere. So I was, again, maybe it's just my nature that I've got to interfere and try and fix everybody's life for them. But when he was going to AA meetings, I was going as well. Oh, it's an open meeting, Dad. I'll come with you, because I was just so, anxious and just wanted things to work out. And I remember being in those rooms, listening to people share their stories. And this doesn't sound really weird, but I was really lapping it up, but it was giving me hope. It was giving me so much hope that things could change, that there was power in recovery and there was power in the recovery community. So I ended up, but my dad, come back to Mary's story. My dad was in and out of hospital too. Things weren't going too well. And I remember one night getting a phone call. He'd been taken by ambulance from the pub to A&E, and I got there and he wasn't too good, and it was a Friday night. So again, the staff were thinking, here we go again, another one. So I could tell he was really unwell, and I was there for hours and hours and hours, and I said, I'm going to have to go and go down the road. But I got a phone call about 3 o'clock in the morning from a nurse saying, right, it's about your dad, we're going to let him out. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, don't think that's a good idea. So had a bit of a chat, and again, maybe being a bit of a pain in the arse, Anne-Marie, being a bit of a difficult woman, I was like, look, please, I think you'll regret that. He's at risk. Please keep him in to the morning to get seen properly. And they did keep him in, and they kept him in for 3 weeks. And I believe that night, if my dad had been discharged that night and sent back to the house on his own, I think he would have died. I really do. So, I understand when I've got constituents, and maybe Karen will talk about this, who do challenge authority, who do challenge the experts, because, when you know somebody, whether it's your friends or your loved one, when you know them, when they're really, not in a good place, you know them better than anybody else, and you know to fight for them. So that helped, and my dad did do not too badly after that, but that's not the end of that story. So I ended up getting into Parliament. I became an MSP. What's that all about? And it'll probably not surprise you that I then became the chair of the Parliament's cross-party group on drug and alcohol misuse, because to me, this has driven my politics. It's never been about, the party colour. It's just about, being a good human being and actually making sure that we have the right system so that people, when they're in trouble, get that help. Because if they don't get the help, the problem escalates, and it's worse for the individual and it's worse for society. So I really immersed myself in that work on that cross-party group on drug and alcohol misuse. And then that took me to 2017. I'd been an MSP for about 1.5 years, and I was Scottish Labour's inequality spokesperson at that time. And politicians, as you know, get confronted with statistics all the time. There's been a percentage increase in this, and look at the trend. So I was getting asked a lot to talk about drug and alcohol issues and to respond to statistics. And I'd never spoken in public about my family situation. So there was this particular day I was getting asked to talk about the latest alcohol statistics, how many people had died, and I pushed back, because I thought, I can't be part of this system that continues to dehumanise people, that talks about statistics rather than the people behind those statistics, the people who we loved, our families, our friends. So I did a thing that was a wee bit emotional. It was an emotional reaction. I had been picked to ask a question at First Minister's Questions, and my question, I used it to say that too often families only break the silence about drug and alcohol harm after they've buried their loved ones. And I said, and I know this because 2 years ago, because 2 years ago my dad died, and that was a result of his drinking. Now, it shouldn't be a big deal for a politician to say that, but it was the first time that the Parliament had really been open and honest about it, to say this is happening, not just in working class families, but mostly it's poorer people that are affected, but this is happening and we can't talk about it because there's so much stigma. Suzanne was right, the stigma, the language, people feel ashamed, and I felt ashamed. And I felt bad for talking about it. I thought, oh, is this the right thing to do? But I think it was the right thing to do, and I'm glad that I did it. And in doing that, I've been able to not just talk about statistics, but to demand change and to be that pain in the arse alongside all of you. Because in the last decade, if we look at drugs alone, drug deaths have doubled in Scotland. And that happened because people didn't care enough. People didn't show compassion. People didn't show that this actually mattered. And there was a time a few years ago when a lot of money was taken out of the system that affected alcohol and drug partnerships. Now, the First Minister has apologised for that, and I respect her for doing that. But do you know what? I've got to ask myself, if that was the Labour Party or any other party, would we have done it differently? And I'm not sure, because I don't think that any of this stuff that we're talking about tonight has been a political priority. I feel that's changing. And it's the people on this meeting that have made that happen, because we've said enough is enough. You know, the phrase that Favour have used, and the hashtag, you know, you keep talking, we keep dying, that has made people feel uncomfortable. It's made me feel uncomfortable. It's made politicians feel comfortable. But that's what it's had to take to confront people, to get in people's faces, to do that, you know, before even COVID happened, because I organised events in Parliament, and Bob has been there by my side, and Bob signed a public pledge on this about the funding. He was the only person in his party to do it. That takes courage, so Bob's got my respect for that, and he always will. And the Minister then signed a pledge, and Joe Fitzpatrick was a lovely man. He's not the Minister anymore. I'm not the kind of person that wants to get into politics just to scalp a minister and blame it on the individual, but that minister had to go because things had got ridiculous. But what I'm very clear about is that we need to change the systems that are locking people in to poverty. So I'm probably over time, and I'm sorry for getting a wee bit emotional, but I feel so strongly about this, and I feel that there's a community of people here tonight that we are the change makers here. We can do this differently. I feel proud that I've been able to, you know, be in my own political party saying, look, we're crap at this, we're not doing enough. You know, our 2016 manifesto said very little about drug and alcohol. Why is that? So I've fought within my own party to change our policy so that we now support decriminalisation. I'm fighting with Keir Starmer to get more powers to come to Scotland to do that, because it's about the funding and the systems, yes, but there's a bigger picture out there. So just a couple of things in closing then from me, because I've kind of got a bit emotional and lost my way here. You know, I strongly believe that we need to be in the next Parliament, the anti-poverty Parliament. We need to end child poverty. We absolutely need to do that. We need to, in terms of proximity, which Darren spoke about at the beginning, and I think just Darren is amazing, and I think Darren's programme Class Wars right now is really going to change how people think as well. But we need more people in the Parliament. who do have experience and who do care. And, you know, Peter Crichton said that he's going to stand for Parliament. I think that's brilliant. People should feel that they should do that. If I can confess to something, you know, I'm in Parliament and I've been there since 2016, and I don't feel very comfortable in it. And sometimes I think, I'm not speaking the right way, Darren. Have I got the right accent for this? Have I got the right pedigree for this? But I've come to realise that actually, if you're trying to change the system, then you shouldn't feel comfortable about that. You shouldn't feel that you're becoming part of the establishment. So that's kind of my advice to people. If you're doing what you're doing and you're making your funding applications, you're going to meetings, don't feel you have to blend in to be like the system. So this is the election like no other. We're in a pandemic. Life is awful for people right now. And we're going to have an election where we can't kind of look people in the eye and hold people's feet to the fire. But I really believe this is our chance to get the issues that we care about high up the agenda. We understand that people don't live in silos, and that, you know, if you're struggling with your mental health, if you're struggling with addiction, you're going to be struggling with your housing and your health as well. So why do we send people to doors that get shut in their face? So we need to have a system where there is no wrong door. But I think this is our time. This is our time in this election to really say we're not accepting the status quo, that things will be different. And tonight, to be with people who care, who are challenging their peers, people like Ian, I just think that is absolutely brilliant. My mum works in a sheriff court, and you know, she doesn't talk about individuals, but I know the traffic that's in and out that court is the busiest place in the town. You know, doing what you're doing, Ian, is so fantastic. And Suzanne, just what you said tonight is amazing. So I'm going to stop there because I've got all emotional and just a bit distracted with myself here. But I think that in politics, showing that, you know, you're not just there to tick boxes and to rhyme off the sound bites, that you're there because you care. You don't always have all the answers, but you care about people. You want to help your communities. If it's not about that, then what is it about? So let's just get out there and keep doing what we're doing. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, as always, Monica, like you know, my mum died around about the same time as your dad, and you know, I wrote a blog about it a month after she died, and I was so worried about, you know, what my brothers would think, in particular of that blog, but I couldn't not write it doing what I do. And I am everything I am because of who my mother was, you know, and because of her illness, and her being an alcoholic, I would never have found recovery had I not asked for help for her. And the journey that she went through, you know, I don't think I would be doing what I do if she didn't go through what she went through. She got a spin dry, and that's what we called it, you know, 4 weeks in Ailsa House, which was the local dry out hospital down in Ayrshire. And she was so vulnerable. You know, it was such a time of great hope for us as a family, my brothers and sisters, you know, but she got 4 weeks, which was only a spin dry, you know. It didn't touch any of the trauma, you know, and she was deeply, deeply traumatized, as was her mother, because I know my mother, my grandmother, and my great grandmother's story, you know, because I've been sober a long time to hear that story. But thank you. I do think we are opening the doors to something new, and we're, like you said, you know, we're battering those doors down, whether people want us to or not. So thank you for your role in that, a hugely important role. And just to be the change of the tone there, Karen, I know your heart's probably bursting at your chest. So I'm just going to say, take a deep breath, darling, and off you go. Just unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. I've really enjoyed listening to everybody else, and I hope I'm not dragging on too much. So I'm just going to tell you a wee bit about my story and what happened to me and my partner, Luke Henderson. So me and Luke had been together for 10 years, and throughout the 10 years he had went into drug-induced psychosis a few times, back in 2013 and 2016. So when it happened again in 2017, we thought, we'll just get him the help that he needs. He'll be all right, he'll get back on the medication and he'll be fine. So we went to the hospital. Sorry, the first time we tried to seek help was on the 22nd of December 2017, and it was NHS 24. And on that phone call, I begged him for help, and I told him that I was seriously concerned. He was hearing voices, he was seeing things that wasn't there, he was just really disturbed, and he hadn't slept in about 3 weeks at this point. So I eventually got through to the mental health nurse, who told me there was nothing they could actually do for him. So, and to take him up to accident emergency. I wasn't happy with this because I felt that they should have helped him. This was our first port of call to get him help. So we then went on to ask to speak for a second opinion and asked to speak to a doctor. So the doctor phoned me back about 3 hours later, and he told me that they don't actually have any medication in the centre that would possibly help Luke's symptoms, and to take him to accident emergency or phone the police. Now, the police wasn't an option in Luke's case, because one of his paranoias was the police had bugged the telly, and in past psychosis he'd actually ended up with criminal charges because of what had happened at that time, so that wasn't an option. So the next day we took Luke to accident emergency, hoping that we'd get some help, and you're lucky if he was in with the mental health team for 20 minutes. How they managed to do a proper risk assessment or anything like that, beyond me. So when I went in to speak to the mental health team, they turned around and said to me that it was an addictions issue because Luke had battled with cocaine for about a year. And I had explained to the mental health team that Luke had actually stopped using cocaine 3 weeks prior, and that's what triggered the psychosis. But they just didn't listen to me, because what do I know? I'm just the person that lives with him and knows him inside out, but I knew nothing compared to them. So they tell us we'd need to do a self-referral to the addiction service. So we left that appointment, and he still wasn't getting any better. So the next day on Christmas Eve, I managed to get an appointment with the CPN, the Community Mental Health Team. We went to that appointment, and again, they was in for 10 minutes, and they called me in and they said that they couldn't help him. It was an addiction issue, and he'd have to go to the addiction centre on the 28th if he wanted any help. They said that they couldn't actually help him because they had smelt cannabis, which was a lie. There was no cannabis in Luke's system, there was no drugs in Luke's system. He had stopped using for 3 weeks, everything. So then we left that appointment, and all our hopes kind of went to the self-referral to the addiction service on the 28th. So we managed to get by Christmas, and we managed to get by Christmas, and then Boxing Day and the day after that, he just wasn't getting any better. So I tried to phone NHS 24 again, and the same happened, go to accident emergency. Tried to phone the community mental health teams, they wouldn't see him, felt as they'd have to do the self-referral on the 28th. So the 27th came, and things were just, the way he was talking, I just knew he was planning to end his life. I just knew there something wasn't right there. And I had asked him, and he told me that he wasn't. But I just knew him better, and knew him better than I probably knew myself. So then on the 27th, we went back to accident emergency for the second time, and you're lucky if he was in 5 minutes, the appointment. When I went in, they actually just let Luke out that appointment, and when I went back, I actually barged my way in to speak to the mental health nurse that spoke to him, and he kind of said, we can't tell you anything, it's patient confidentiality, you just have to find out from Luke. Now, Luke wasn't in the physical mind to even give consent at this point. He was that unwell that the voices had just kind of took control of his full life. So again, we get told we'd have to do the self-referral the next day, and all our hopes again get put on this appointment. Over this time, I just kept saying, look, we get to Thursday and we'll get you the help that we need. All we need to do is get to Thursday. So Thursday came, and we get told the self-referrals start at 9 o'clock. So we went along at 9 o'clock in the morning just to be told by the reception that the self-referrals don't actually happen until 2 o'clock that day. So from what we were told with the CPNs to what actually happens in practice was two completely different things. And for me, that tells me these two services don't actually communicate. So we done the self-referral and it was a paper filling exercise. The help that we had been promised prior to coming to this appointment didn't materialise, and we got told we would have to wait another 2 weeks. So this was one too many doors shut in Luke's face, and he just had enough. He wanted the pain to stop, he wanted these voices to stop, and he didn't want to feel like this anymore. So that night, we had a Chinese. I fell asleep early because I was absolutely shattered. I was at the point where I kind of needed a bed beside him because I hadn't slept because I was that worried. I knew that I had to stay up until Luke fell asleep. So that night was the first night I had fell asleep before Luke. I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning that night with my son calling on me. I was absolutely petrified when I woke up with fear inside me. I just can't explain it. And I noticed that Luke wasn't beside me. So I went to check on my son, and he said that his dad had woke him up. So then I went to look for Luke and see where he was. I found Luke had hanged himself just feet away from where me and our kids were sleeping. Just one too many doors had shut in his face, and he just took enough, and he thought that was the only way out. That was the only way to stop this pain, and that was the only way to get help. So after Luke died, I went into a bit of an anger stage where I kind of felt the services had really let Luke down. I had addiction issues, and the addiction issues needed to be addressed. But at the time he was presenting, it was mental health, it was the psychosis that was the problem, and it was the psychosis that needed to be addressed. So when I went into the anger, I kind of started going through all the avenues. How can I do it? What can I do? So I contacted my local MSP, which was Monica, and that was actually the morning I found Luke. I had contacted Monica, and it was over the Christmas period as well. Monica wrote back to me, and she's supported me and my family in ways I can't thank her enough. She's been absolutely inspirational in everything that I've done. Monica raised Luke's case at First Minister's questions, and as a result of that, I met with Claire Hockey, the Mental Health Minister. Now, when I met Claire, I told her everything that I'm kind of telling you today, and I was very disappointed in her response. This is somebody who had the power to try and help and try and change and learn lessons from what happened to Luke, so that no other family has to go through this pain, and no other family has to go through that torment of trying to find their loved ones the support that they need. I says to Claire that I feel as if Luke went into the psychosis from stopping the cocaine, and that it's not actually recognised that there's any withdrawals from cocaine, it's all psychological. And it might be psychological, but that psychological withdrawal needs to have a pathway programme put in place. So I told this to Claire, and what Claire said to me is that's another minister's department, that's another minister's job. And that to me is where it's stigma for the highest level, and it's not even just further down at the front line, that's coming for the top down. So what chance is it any of the frontline workers actually going to have? So after meeting with Claire, I wasn't happy, and I actually done a petition to the Parliament Petitions Committee, and that petition went and spoke to the committee, and that petition got closed with nothing ever changing. We're now 3 years down the line, and I know Luke's case isn't the only one. I've spoke to many different people from all over Scotland and all over the world who the same issues have happened. They've tried to get their loved ones help, and they've been told that it's another service, or they can't help them, or there's nothing wrong with them. It's echoing right throughout the world, and something really, really needs to change. We can't keep letting our young men and women die from a preventable death. I believe if Luke got the help that he needed, that I told him he needed, then Luke would still be here with me today. But unfortunately, nothing I ever do will ever bring Luke back to me. But what I can do is, through Luke's story and through what happens and me raising awareness, then maybe it'll change it for somebody else. Maybe somebody else's loved one will get the help that they need. Maybe they'll fight a wee bit harder at the hospital, and maybe they'll manage to get their loved one to help. And I can only say, through my experience, even after Luke died, trying to get myself the help and my kids the help that they needed has been a challenge. I've had to go to extreme measures to get my 2 kids into counselling. It was only after my son put himself in a very dangerous situation and said that he wanted to die to be with his dad that he got seen the cams. My daughter had to self-harm before she would be seen at cams, and my daughter was only seen just before Christmas she started with cams, so that's 3 years later after her dad passed. So something's broken in the system and something really needs to change. And I just pray and hope that through Luke's story that something does change and something and some other family doesn't have to go through this pain, because I wouldn't wish it in my worst nightmare. I'm going to stop now, so thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was so powerful. No, I was thinking about what Bob Doris was saying about families and the role that families can play. You know, and you very powerfully said there, you knew how much danger he was in and nobody would listen. And I remember, I just see Tracy McFall's commenting in the chat. I remember probably about 12, maybe even 13 years ago, we tested something called the Circle of Change, or the Circle, I can't remember what it was, but it was after Scotland's iceberg report, another report. And the family, the loved ones, were to have a central role in the person who was suffering and in their care. And yet again, you know, nothing changed. And that's what worries me about this money, you know, this new £255 million. It's great, you know, there's an election coming, we're grateful for the money, you know, but unless we change those systems and unless we change that leadership, we're just throwing money at it. We need systems change and we need new thinking in those positions of leadership. We need people that are willing to change. Yeah. It sounds so simple, isn't it? It's so simple, but and families have got a major role to play in that, a major role to play. Yeah, so thank you again, Karen, you know, amazingly powerful. And thank you for going the distance, you know, the tenacity and persistence that you've shown, you know, to get your voice heard and to get Luke's voice heard and the Wayne's voices heard. This is what we need. We need more ordinary people to do that. So thank you for your time tonight and committing to do it and to continue to telling your story. Just keep telling it, darling.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to tell Luke's story. Really appreciate it for everybody who's listened tonight.
Oh, thank you, darling. Thank you. I'm just going to hand over to Sam, who has been wonderful in helping us with communications here. There you go, Sam, over to you, darling.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just want to first thank the panel for taking the time to be here tonight. For the past few months, I've really had the privilege of working very closely with Natalie and SISCO, and more recently, Annemarie. I've been fortunate enough to have seen, read and heard firsthand some of the stories and experiences of the men and women who have used these recovery services. And these stories have really saddened me, and the failings have really angered me, and I have felt compassion and a lot of frustration at times. But most of all, these stories have really inspired me. To me, there is nothing more inspirational than seeing someone's journey to recovery. And as we probably all know, recovery is not something that's black and white. There's a lot of grey. There are ups and downs. There are steps forwards and sometimes steps backwards. But in a story, there's always a beginning, middle, and end. And so it really matters not how your story starts, but how your experiences and your life lessons guide your story to its end. And I'm really speaking from somewhat of an outsider's perspective on this topic. but the experiences and the voices of the men and women who use these recovery services are critical and paramount to the future development of new services, funding allocations, and government policies. I really believe it's no longer enough to give the reins to someone who solely has fancy connections or professional way or the qualifications. Recovery services should take on a grassroots approach and use the experiences and the voices of the men and women who use these services to really shape the future of recovery and construct a foundation based upon lived experience. And I'll keep this short and sweet, but I just really want to say, if there's anyone in the audience or anyone who will one day see this panel and who may feel like they don't have a voice or that they can't speak up and be heard, we are listening, and the people in power should be too. So your voice matters, your story matters, and you matter. Thank you very much.
Yay, and thank you, Sam, for lending us your considerable talent and skills to helping us not just organise tonight, but, you know, inspire us as we go along as well, darlings. It's great to have you on the team. I'm just going to hand over now to a good friend of mine who's going to share a wee bit of his experience, strength and hope, I'm sure. That's you, Lee. That'll be your heart pounding. That's you. On you go.
Thank you, Annemarie. Yeah, I'm Lee. I'm a recovering addict, and it is a privilege to get asked to speak on here tonight. It's also a privilege to have the ability to do it as well, because I am petrified, and I'm looking at myself and I don't want to do that. There we go. I am petrified. And my hands are sweating and my heart is going at 1,000 miles an hour, and my head is telling me that I can't do it, and my fight or flight response is kicking in. It's telling me to run, and I'm really feeling the fear, man. And I think that's the important thing, is like today I've got the ability to feel the fear. A couple of people have spoken about it, and fear drove me, you know, all that early childhood stuff, and I was severely bullied, and those kind of negative, fearful experiences shaped my perceptions of myself and my perceptions of the outside world, and it was a really, really painful time. And the first time I found substances, it wasn't intentional. I didn't know that was going to happen, but the first time I found substances at a young age, that fear was removed, and I felt like I'd found a solution. That's what it felt like. And once I'd found that solution and I'd found that escape from that emotional pain and that negative thinking, it was never ever going to go in any other direction in my life. It was always gonna head that direction, and it did. And I was in active addiction for 20 years, and for 17 of those years I was an active heroin addict. And by the end of my using, it had taken me to running to Scotland, you know, where I knew no one, and trying to run away from myself and stuff. And I ended up on the streets of Stirling begging, suicidal, terrified, man, terrified, full of shame, full of guilt, remorse, and confusion. I remember the confusion as well, kind of wondering, how has my life got here? How did I get here? It wasn't supposed to be like this. It was like I'd opened my eyes one day, and it was like I'd woken up. Like I'd just opened my eyes and I woke up from a dream, and I was sitting on the curb with a cup, begging to get money to inject heroin. But I didn't know what I didn't know. Do you know what I mean? I didn't know there was another way. I didn't know there was a solution. I didn't know that it was possible to stop doing what I was doing. Even at my worst point, I always remember getting that bag of heroin in my hand and thinking, thank God I've still got you. Like, thank God. What would I do if I didn't have you? Like, I've got nothing else, but thank God I've still got this. That was the insanity that my thinking was at constantly. And my experience, as a lot of people in here know, is treatment. And I am going to speak quite quickly about that treatment centre, because it's really important, especially with the stuff that's been spoken about. I went to an abstinence-based treatment centre in Greenock called Jericho House, and I was in there for a year. And while I was in there, I picked up a self-analysis program, and started to look at myself, and I started to look at who Lee was, why he felt the way he felt about himself, and then more importantly, how I was going to start to practice changing those negative perceptions of myself and those negative perceptions of the world. And I was in there for 12 months, and I've been out of treatment 8.5 months. And if it hadn't have been for that place, I'd be dead. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that if I hadn't have gone in there, I wouldn't be here to do this now. And that's really important, because that's the experience of hundreds of people. You know, that treatment centre that I was in, it works. There's not a one fix approach for everyone. That's the reality, but it works for a lot of people. There are hundreds of people who have been through that place and are still clean. In fact, the statistics for it are that in the 18 years that they have been running, 68% of individuals that completed the program, that's 68% of individuals that completed that program are still clean today. And I don't know any other treatment centre in the UK that has success rates like that. So it works. Yet despite that, they are not acknowledged, they are not supported, and they're not funded. They're given breadcrumbs, and they face closure constantly. Staff might get paid 1 month, and then there's the potential of not getting paid the next month. And that was the case just before I got in. And if they had closed down at that point, I would have had nowhere to have gone, and I would have been dead. So I just wanted to say that, really, because Annemarie and a couple of the others were talking about like making sure that this new amount of funding that we've got, which is amazing, goes to the right places and is handed out fairly as much as possible. So while I was in there, I come across the notion of abstinence, which I'd never heard of, didn't even know what the word meant. I didn't have the ability to perceive or comprehend the idea of living my life without any mood or mind altering substances whatsoever. I'd never thought about it. My experience was right from the beginning of going to addiction services was going in, being asked one question: how much heroin are you taking? I would tell them how much heroin I was on, and then within maybe a few days or a week, I would be on a methadone or Subutex prescription. No one ever asked me if, at any point, if I'd ever considered the idea of getting clean, if I've ever considered the idea of abstinence. 11 years I was on medication-assisted treatment, 11 years, and at no point did anyone ever ask me that question. And I bring that up because that's the experience of a lot of people that I speak to and that I work with who have experience within methadone and Subutex and stuff. Just going to breathe. The other thing as well that I really wanted to speak about was reintegration, because I think it's really, really important. And, you know, I'm really lucky, again, through being in that treatment centre and the fact that they work you towards that point of reintegration constantly while you're in there. You're building up relationships with people that are in recovery. And then you've got the ability and the option to move on to supported resettlement like I'm in now. And that was crucial, because if I hadn't have got the reintegration part of things right, everything that I had done would have been worthless. All that work and that time and the money that had gone into my recovery up to that point, if I'd have got the reintegration wrong, it all would have been a waste of time. And again, the people that I speak to, that seems to be kind of the general consensus, not even just treatment. Treatment was my experience, but even people that are coming out of prison, and they might work towards finding their own recovery while they're in prison. And you know, it's hard enough for me in treatment, let alone trying to get clean and find recovery in prison. But then they come out and they are reintegrated. They are dropped back into chaotic environments, whether that might be a hostile environment or housed in you know, notorious hotspots for not just addiction but criminality as well. And then they just end up going through that same cycle over and over and over again. it's been spoken about as well, stigma, you know, stigmatizing, stereotyping and criminalizing addiction. And that stuff's really affected me, because all that ever did was drive me further and further into my own isolation. And it wasn't a nice place to be. On your own, terrified, and the only person that I had for company was myself, who happened to be the one person that I'd been led to believe was a monster and socially unacceptable and socially disconnected. You know, it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff to hold. No wonder I couldn't stop using drugs for such a long time, man, with all that stuff sitting there. My feelings were unmanageable before I picked up substances, let alone with all that, you know, all that judgment, feeling like I had some kind of unique, weird moral deficiency, when that wasn't the case, man. That wasn't the case at all. I say to, you know, the guys, if I'm sharing in my fellowship, or I say to the guys that I mentor with and stuff, I always refer to them as my people, because I believe they are my people. But you know what's really important? Do you know what we need to come to realize is they're not just my people, they're your people as well. Because we're your sons and daughters, your mothers, your fathers, your brothers and your sisters, and we're your friends. And addiction doesn't care, man. It doesn't care who you are, where you come from, what you've got, what you look like, what job you've got, what car you drive. It doesn't care about any of that. And yet we feel like we're just being left outside, like we've just been abandoned. And that's hard. And that's hard for me to deal with as a recovering addict, almost 20 months absent. You know, I still have to work with that stuff, and I still have to feel that stuff, but it's even harder when I'm sitting in a group and I see that stuff fresh, you know, within other people that I work with and that I'm around, and I see that pain and that suffering in their eyes, man. And the only people that can change that is us. So incredibly nervous, and why wouldn't I be? Do you know what I mean? I'm a human, but I am incredibly grateful to be here, and I'm very, very grateful that I've had the opportunity to open my mouth and for one of the first times in my life actually be heard. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Annemarie. Thank you.
Awesome, Lee. Absolutely brilliant, you know. And I know, like, people would always tell me, you know, you've got a real gift for articulating stuff, and I would never believe them. And people would say, you know, like, keep doing it, you're doing well, you know, feel the fear and do it anyway, and all the stuff that people are saying to you in the chat. But they also said to me, you know, Annemarie, recovery advocacy isn't a recovery program, you know. So I know that there's a lot of people who get into advocacy and they don't have, you know, a solid foundation in the recovery, but I see that you've got that, not just from the work that you've done in Jericho, but the work that you continue to do in the community with SISCO, and you're an absolute joy to watch, and I hope, you know, you remain and stay in my life, Lee. You really are, you know. I'm excited for what your life's got ahead of it, you know, and that's one of the joys we get to witness. And coming from the culture of recovery, you know, this is one of the big things that I don't think our systems and our politicians and our treatment addiction professionals they just don't get to understand the culture of recovery. Like, you get to come into my life, men like you, women like you, and I get to come into your life, and we get to walk each other on this journey, and some of us become really, really good friends, and some of us help each other heal from the wounds that got us into the mess in the first place, you know. And that infinite cycle of love and connection is available to us all, and culturally we expect each other to thrive, and I'm genuinely excited to see where your recovery is going to take you, you know, because I see people coming into recovery and going on to, you know, university and becoming film stars and, you know, all sorts of crazy, wonderful, ordinary as well things, you know, peaceful, content human beings. And I don't think people who work in the addiction field often get to see that. You know, the culture of recovery is just so hopeful and so positive, and, you know, heartbreaking as well at times, because we know people die. But, you know, the stories of miraculous stories of people's lives coming together are everyday stories to us. We expect it, and there's something missing from our treatment system when they don't expect it, you know. So thank you, darling. Powerful words, and yeah, no, thank you. I recognise the God in you, my friend. And it gives me great pleasure, oh, where's your Natalie, to hand it over for a summary for your Natalie to throw her very smashing tuppence worth of. Off you go, my darling.
I don't know why I agreed to do the summary. Why did I wait to the end? Stupidity. I'm very nervous too, and that's purely because I care. I care what we speak about, I care what's said tonight, and I care who's listening and who hears these voices. I am going to read from a script, because when I do, sometimes I can have what we call scheme Tourette's, and I can swear a bit. So let's just rein it in and read from a script, and then I won't swear as much, or hopefully not at all. So thank you to everyone, all the panel members, for agreeing to be on the event tonight. It means a lot to myself, Annemarie and Sam, especially on Valentine's Day. So thank you that we're taking your time away from your loved ones, and you're coming and spending it with our loved ones that are on this event. Thank you to everyone who has came and attended and participated through the group chat. It's been very, very busy, and I look forward to going through. I know that Tracy McFall has been sending really, really good stats, as has Suzanne, sorry. So if you have any interest, please download them and read them. They're very, very interesting. Okay, so how do we summarise tonight's event? How can we wrap up the trauma and pain for the voices that we've listened to? Do we really hear the unheard voices? I want to tell you one more story, to take you on one last journey. Then the final judgment can be your own. Once upon a time, a young baby was born in one of the most disadvantaged areas in Glasgow. She was born into a hostile environment, and even before her birth, the home environment was hostile and angry. Isn't it strange that even before her birth, the atmosphere in what would be her family home was tense and filled with uncertainties and insecurities? Her birth brought so much joy to the family, but that joy was soon to be exchanged for jealousy, resentment, anger, and fear. There is no doubt our family loved her dearly. However, they could only nurture the child with the values passed on to them by their parents. As a young girl, she grew up, and she always felt a present danger, always on high alert. Growing up, she would seek validation from those around her, when all she really wanted was to be loved, cared for, needed, and heard. During her early years, layers of trauma were to devastate her family to no repair. Death. The death of her father, a man who lost his own life to his own demons, and his only escape was a rope around his neck. Things got progressively worse. Social work involvement, and she then became a part of a bigger system. She then became a number, a label. She then became lost. She was removed from her family home, removed from the women who gave birth to her, removed from her sister, the only one who could protect her from the bad things that happened. She couldn't, as a young girl, understand why she no longer stayed with her mum and sister. She thought, maybe they don't love me anymore. She thought that she wasn't good enough. This drove a deep distrust in the young girl and would create the most insecure value in her core belief system. She no longer trusted people, and would question anyone for simply being nice. She grew up terrified of being abandoned and would always exhaust herself trying to fit in, to be liked through her own fear of rejection. Her teenage years were turbulent and filled with bad choices and poor decisions. She began to search outside herself for happiness, but gained more wounds, more trauma, more sadness, more darkness, more pain. She searched for validation in relationships to be met with violence, jealousy, pain and scars. One thing, drugs and alcohol, that became her only saviour. But even then, it only lasted a short period of time. Then the pain would overcome her like a wave, and she would drown back into the unhappiness and self-destruction of her life. She tried and tried and tried to escape and went to every corner of the world. But she only felt good for a short period of time. Then the pain would come back and it would cripple her emotional well-being. Then she would look for the comfort blanket, the one friend that never abandoned her, drugs and alcohol. You see, drugs and alcohol don't discriminate. They'll always be your friend, no matter what. Even the birth of our own children was not enough to fix this gaping hole, this emptiness, this darkness. No one listened. No one really heard. And when they did, they didn't understand. Then one day, someone invested in that girl. That girl was me. Someone validated my pain. Someone helped me find a safe place to get better, to get well, to heal. That place was to be residential rehab, a place where I learned about me, a place where I could attend grief counselling and nurture my broken heart, a place where I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So you see, it wasn't just me. It wasn't just me not wanting to comply with society for all those years. It was society not wanting to comply with me. It didn't want to hear me. It didn't want to hear my pain. It didn't want to validate my story. From that one person hearing me, I would then meet more who invested in my journey. I would meet more who would stand by my side through the ups and downs, never judging and always holding that door welcome open for me to walk back through. I found new friends in the recovery rooms of AA, CA and Smart Recovery. And most importantly, I started to see my own value and my own worth. We don't become addicts and alcoholics because we're physically, mentally and spiritually well. We become addicts and alcoholics because we're trying to escape the pain that is so deep inside that you could never imagine. I don't share this much about myself very often, but the reason I do today is because I believe we all need to be that one person in someone's life. If we can take anything from this tonight as professional people, as lived experience, or as those just getting into the doors of recovery, let's listen to what Gabor Mate says. Not why the addiction, not why are we using drugs, why the pain. If it was for a mother's love, there wouldn't be addiction. We don't do this to hurt people, we do it because we're already in pain. I will finish on that and thank you again to everyone who has participated and joined in this event. Thank you for your Sunday night VJ. I hope your parents, your partners and your parents aren't raging that you're not with them. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That's such a beautiful way to end. But before we do, I just want to say, if anybody has any questions for the speakers that are still here, if the speakers are willing, if they want to raise their hands, or if they don't want to actually speak, just feel free to put a wee question in the chat box, and we'll get to you. But I know from any time Favour UK and SISCO work together and we put on an event, we always like to follow up with a wee report of some kind, or we don't like to be accused of just being a talking shop. So we will put together a wee report here, nothing fancy, nothing academic, very community-based, down to earth, but full of love and full of truth. And we will get that report to not just the politicians that were here tonight, but those that can help us change the beautiful world that Scotland is. So yeah, it has been a really special event. I don't know if there's any hands up. I don't see any hands up, is there?
No, there's no hands up that I can see.
No, well, that's unusual. Everybody must be feeling good. Nobody's wanting to say anything. These are all sated.
Or
Yes,
crying into their tissues.
Aye, it is. It's very much recorded, Jill, and it's on Facebook. It'll be on there forever and ever, as long as Facebook's still part of the FTSE 100. Thank you everybody for joining us. If anybody's got any last minute comments, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Annemarie.
Hiya, pal.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I've been engaging with SISCO from the 7th of January.
Brilliant.
I was basically on the road to destruction. I had nothing left. I was dead. My family left us. My missus left us. Everything. I had nothing left. And Natalie dropped me an email because my uncle randomly started sending people emails, and like he's got like friends in high places and stuff. He was sending emails and stuff to try and get me help, and I didn't want the help because I thought the help that I was getting was fine, and it is fine. Like the help I've found now, like SISCO, I've never had help like this in my life, and now I'm at a point where I'm scared, like how good my life is. I'm scared, like what's next. Like I used to walk about and the world was against me. Now it's wrapped around me and it's comforting me. And I don't know what that is. I never knew what that was. Like as Suzanne says, like the thing when we're younger and we don't have like our parents around and stuff. Like we spoke a bit about that today in the group. Well, I kind of spoke a bit about that, and I find that's a big impact on my youth. But I didn't blame that on my youth. I'm now 2 year clean. Like, but I blame 2 year clean on prison. But I did like, have a couple of hiccups in prison, but I'm just going to put that down to like pure boredom. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just not going to let that affect my recovery, because like, my recovery outside's different from inside. That's the way I feel. And now I've got everybody back. I've got my missus back. I've got my stepdaughter. I've got my gran. I've not got my dad. I found my dad dead when I was a kid. I've not got my mum. My mum's alive, but she's a tearaway. Like, but I would, if she got older and changed her ways, I would be open. But she's not changing, so she's at my life. Do you know what I mean? That people change, but I just don't believe she'll change anytime soon. So at the minute, I'm content with my life, and I'm happy that SISCO is involved with my life. And as I say, I've got my family back, and I've got a second family. I think SISCO's my second family, and I think this meeting today, I thank everybody today for getting together and even caring about addicts. Like, who are we to be cared about? Like, we stole off yous, we robbed your shops, do you know what I mean? Like, well, why do you care about people like us? You know what I mean? Like, yous are so kind, like so kind people. Like, I just
Evan,
don't get.
We care because we are you, darling. We're in recovery as well, but we're just a bit further down the road. Yeah.
I'm just finding it hard to know, like, to find everything like the way it is, like, so easy. Like, I've never had it easy.
Yeah, it can be really hard to accept love in it, and to be safe. To be safe and to be comforted is so unusual. To have a support system, it can feel really abnormal and really strange, but you just stick in there and you'll be that to somebody else as well. Once you get used to that, you can then give that to other people.
Thanks.
Right, darling. Anybody else want to come in and comment before we close?
Can I come in, please?
Aye, on you go, Hen.
Hiya. Just want to come in and thank you, Zotty. Coming in to see it's got my wee heart beating again. Was numb for that many years. And getting connected with strong women. My thoughts totally different. I'm seeing the world through different eyes and everything. Honestly, it's bloody amazing. I'm getting it all, like, views love me until I can love myself. I'm getting it all now. I just read a wee letter that I wrote a couple of weeks ago when I was sitting in my mum's. Right, a brilliant wee night at home, managed to get through the day, kept using Anna's wee tip. I'm in mum's kitchen, had a brilliant day, spending time with the family. Actually stopped doing tidying up and got on my knees and thanked the Lord for the wonderful feeling of emotion. Truly thank you for today's blessings. Felt you in my every breath and working through me. You gave me many blessings today. Heard the birds this morning and truly thanked you. Seen the squirrels and really thanked you. Spent time with the family and truly thanked you. Asked for forgiveness and truly thanked you. The pigeon shot at me, I laughed and thanked you. Was totally in the here and now. My truth. Was amazed at how I felt you working through me. My heart's beating so fast, I thank you. Think I need to ask so-and-so to sponsor me. Feeling your power working through me. And thank you, what a rush. Believe I met you for a reason, so-and-so. Think you can sponsor me, please. Thank you, Lord, amen. You can also include here my mother's, daughter's, son's voices. Thank you, Lord. You have given me many blessings today. I keep putting my hand on my heart, feeling the air in my lungs, and I thank you. Just being at one with you, so peaceful, free, laughter. Thank you, Lord. Help me get through this spiritual program. I can't do it alone.
Well, there you go. Well, I don't think we could have ended on a better note. I think that's just the place to end it. How cool is that? Thank you so much, everybody. I think we could just leave it there. Eh? And yeah, going over to Facebook and you'll be able to watch it again or comment on the Facebook page. But that was a perfect ending. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Annemarie.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Annemarie. God bless. Thank you.
Thanks,
Annemarie. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Annemarie.
Guys, bye.
Thanks, everybody. That was brilliant.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye.
Hey, Dan.
Bye. Say bye-bye.
Bye, Annemarie. Bye, Natalie.
Bye, Annemarie.
Bye, Obi.
Bye, Natalie.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
That was great, guys. Thanks a lot.
Bye, Nora.
Well done.
Lovely, Karen. How cool was that? My God.
It's amazing. And you look pure smashing.
And that's very important because Facebook is listening as well. Did brilliant. What a beautiful event. Natalie, that was beautiful reading, Hen. Thank you.
I've just stopped us live streaming on Facebook, and thank you so much to our speakers there for hanging back. Do you think it went okay?
It went okay until I didn't realise how the chat function worked, and I've sent a love heart to somebody called Nick. Obviously, I tried to send a love heart when Kev was speaking, just to say there's love sent to you, but I specifically sent it to somebody called Nick. So Nick, if you're out there, apologies. I don't know if it's a girl or a boy, but they've now got my heart.
Brilliant.
It's Valentine's you're in. How did that feel for you?
For me?
Oh, Suzanne.
Suzanne.
I'm asking Suzanne. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Unmute, Suzanne.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
It's stories of pain that make people listen. And if you can make them about more than pain, so that they're not just entertainment, that they are a vehicle to take you to somewhere else, then that's what we should tell. So tonight was about doing that. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, it was good, wasn't it? I always think there's definitely I thought with it at the end there, I'm always a bit, because the whole Scottish Presbyterian stuff, like, oh Jesus, somebody's talking about God. It's perfect, isn't it? It's like to end on stuff like that, because there is definitely a higher power involved, and certainly the work that Natalie and I end up doing together, isn't that right, darling?
Yeah, always power in it. But then I feel like our power always meets the force, and the force is government or a hierarchy of people that are so resistant to change.
So if the more people, part of it is understanding how our system's resistant to change.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy, because systems should change. I mean, that's not an issue. If we then get curious about, okay, why are systems resistant to change? What are the forces that why do they do that? And just somehow get, and there are things that help to go, okay, how do systems resist? That was what James Robertson was trying to talk about in the 1970s, about why hospitals wouldn't change, and why then it becomes part of understanding what one is up against, is accepting that systems do not want to change, and you have to know more about that. And you guys, I can't believe anyone told you to be good, Annemarie. I'm shocked at that. And like, don't fucking.
She actually wagged her finger at me. She said, "No, Annemarie, remember Natalie, that Cora event you and I went to last year? She came up to me right away and she went, right, I'm telling you, you have to be good today." And I'm like, what do you even mean by it? It's so insulting and so patronising. And it's because I'm not polished. I don't speak like her. I'm better educated than her. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm more experienced. But anyway, and I do respect this woman. She's, I do respect her. She did a lot of great work in the 70s and 80s for women in Scotland. But I was like, and it's almost like she's trying to tell me not to behave in an honest way, and that's how I interpret it. She's wanting me to lose my integrity, and I'm like, I'm good enough. I don't need to change. Yeah. Sorry, rant.
It was a brilliant event. I'm telling you, I just fell in love with so many people. I love it when my heart gets opened. Like I keep thinking my heart's opened, and then I'll come into another event like this, and there's more love that pours into my heart. So I don't think I don't know if you realise, like I'm watching everybody as well, as in case there's any kind of Zoom bombers, right? But people who are being so touched, you can see it on their face, all the chat stuff that talks about inspiration and hope. Was it not Natalie? What was that? Monica was saying it's our time.
Yeah.
I love that, and I think it's a critical mass, isn't it? This is our time. There's enough people speaking.
I've locked myself in this room because the door's shut and I'm bursting. Hopefully, if you are recorded, doesn't matter, bursting for a pish. So I'm going to bid everyone good night. Okay. And wait, Suzanne, were you going to ask me a question, Suzanne?
I was just going to ask you. I don't want to make your body uncomfortable. But I just
too late. I've got my legs crossed.
What do you think the legal system needs to make change? You know, I mean, like all these stories. What do you think the legal system cannot hear?
So at the moment, what they're not hearing is about the concept of childhood trauma. So are we still recording? So
no, we can switch it off.
All right.